Welcome everyone to TLDR series. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is basically a quick format where we take a topic and we're trying to show you how AWS can help you resolve pretty much anything with this topic. With me, of course, resident Tony Stark, Sebastian Straub. How are you doing, Sebastian?
Very good. Excited to be here. I brought my buddy,
Yeah,
as you can see.
that's a given. So yeah, big topic today. As is written here, at this point we know that ransomware is inevitable. Okay, pretty much like Thanos for you.
That is very true. It's
Yeah,
ransomware and Thanos are inevitable, but defeat is optional. I would say, well, we'll show you a version of your data's witness protection program, hiding it away in a safe method where even the smartest bad guys cannot find it, touch it, delete it, or modify it. That's really the way to go. Because as you said, it's inevitable. It'll happen.
it'll happen, and unfortunately, as the numbers tell us, it happened quite a lot and more often than we think. For us, being a vendor that provides a backup and recovery software, you get to hear all the stories, and there are a lot of them, unfortunately. Okay, if a few years back there were quite a few, all of a sudden it becomes more common, and the ones that are actually getting out of it are the ones that are taking care of the data. Okay, the perimeter and everything with regards to that, that's a whole different topic, but the data is what ransomware is after. And it's not only the pay. So if you look at the 279 lawsuits, this is actually what results. So you end up paying 75, and then you're getting about 280 lawsuits from your customers or the people that you own their data. So this is a big one, and of course, we're here to try and help you understand, if you're using N2W,
You know what's
how
even
to.
crazier?
Yeah,
Behind that 872 million, I actually looked into this. That's ongoing damage to United Health's bottom line. And in their most recent earnings call, they reported it's expected to surpass $1 billion. And as you just said, the craziest thing is they actually paid. They paid 22 million to the bad guys, and that is still an ongoing bottom line impact that they have. And well, the other number that you have here, 1.1 billion in payments, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg if you also count the ongoing cost of those attacks. Like in the case of United Health, it's just
yeah,
ballooning.
yeah. Not to mention the ones that are undisclosed, right? They're trying to keep this off the media, so this number is bigger, and rising at the minute. So yeah, so Sebastian, with that in mind, take us through, what we can do, and what kind of are the best practices that we have in the product that can help our customers.
Yeah, sure. Well, paranoia is a reality seen on a finer scale. And speaking of paranoia, because I know some of you might be thinking that all this backup talk is just for the overly cautious. Let me just say this. It's not paranoia when the threat is real. You're just more aware of the consequences than everyone else. Remember, it's
Yeah,
the paranoid people who survive the zombie apocalypse in the end. If someone accuses you of being paranoid about your cross-cloud immutable backups, remind them that even zombies know the value of brain storage. You're just protecting yourself from the inevitable. And now, as we move through the slides, you might start to feel like you've stumbled into a movie review show instead of a webinar, with all the
yeah,
talk about strange days and the thrilling drama of ransomware attacks. I wouldn't blame you. But trust me, this is one plot twist you don't want to miss, because the hero
yeah.
in this story is going to be you, with your data safe and sound.
Great movie, by the way. If
It is.
for the ones that didn't watch, it's a great movie.
So let's talk about the three types of administrators you might encounter in the wild. And let's stick with our movie theme here. Any resemblance to real people is pure coincidence. First up, we've got mild paranoia Mike. Now, Mike is a guy who's seen a thing or two, and he knows that keeping all his eggs in one basket is a bad idea. So what does he do? He creates cross-account disaster recovery plans. Mike is the kind of guy who double checks that he locked the door before leaving the house, Not overly cautious, but just careful enough to sleep well at night. And Mike's thinking, why risk it when I can have my backups safe in another account? Better be safe than sorry. Next, you have medium paranoia Mel. Mel takes it up a notch. He's not just cross accounts. Oh no, that's just the beginning. Mel makes sure that his last backup is immutable. That's right. Mel isn't just locking the door. He's installed a deadbolt and maybe a security camera too. Mel's motto is, well, if they can't change it, they can't mess it up. And honestly, can you blame him? After all, in a world where ransomware lurks around every corner, Mel's just making sure that even if they get in, they can't do any real damage. And then there's spicy paranoia Steve. Steve isn't just taking any chances. He's playing the game at the highest level. Not only does he make sure his backups are immutable, but he's also got them stored across different clouds. Steve is the kind of guy who's not only locking the door, but he also installs a moat, a drawbridge, and maybe even hires a few dragons just for good measure. He's thinking, why stop at one level of protection when I can have them all? And Steve's backups are tucked away in a different cloud, completely out of the reach from any potential threat. He's got that ultimate peace of mind, knowing his data is safe and no matter what. So where do you see yourself? Are you a Mike, a Mel, a Steve? Each one of these guys has a solid strategy, but let's be real. Steve's approach is the gold standard because when it comes to your data, why settle for anything less than the best protection? Let's channel our inner Steve and aim for that ultimate spicy level of paranoia, because when the bad guys come knocking, you'll be sipping a pina colada and chuckling as they realize they just brought a rubber knife to a lightsaber fight.
Paranoid guy here. Okay. So there's paranoid alone, right? So I'm new guy, as you know, and I've mentioned previously in previous shows. You can't avoid hearing that backup and recovery software is also being breached.
That's
How
true.
often did it happen in N2W, and what did we do about it?
That's an interesting story. I'm glad you bring this up. So
That's what I
I
asked.
can tell you that in the entire lifetime of N2WS, how often have we been breached since 2012? The grand total number is 0. We have never been breached. So that's why we are really at the forefront of trying to protect our customers' data. So it has never,
Okay.
ever happened. So that much for paranoia, right?
Okay. Yeah, good to know.
All right, so let's hop into the demo so we can actually show you how you can protect yourself. So the first thing that we should probably talk about is immutable backups. So there's two different types. The first one I'm going to show you when you create a repository for your archival data. So when you select this, down here you'll find a tick box called immutable backup. You want to tick box that. And then you have two options. So you have the option of legal hold or compliance lock. Difference is legal hold is still the administrator can get in if need be. And compliance lock, absolutely nobody can get in, even the administrator. So even if you were compromised, your root admin is compromised, makes no difference. Even AWS itself cannot delete this. So those are your two options. And it's pretty simple. Just simply click the tick box that you want to have immutable archives. The other thing is, because we are a multi-cloud solution, we also have the ability to perform backups in Azure as well. So when you define your Azure storage account, now guess what? There's another tick box. So it's the same thing. Just make sure that you're going to tick box this as well so that your archives that you're creating will be immutable.
New guy question. What's the difference between immutability and true air gapping?
That is an excellent question. All right, so air gapping and true air gapping. That's an excellent question. Let me show you. So when I go into the backup policies, then we're going to create backups. You're going to find out the backup targets. That's what we're going to back up, and the product scales extremely well. It makes no difference if it's 2 resources like here, or if it's 200, 2,000, 20,000. Absolutely no problem. Your first, in air quotes, air gap is your disaster recovery backup. So this is where you create an additional backup of the resource in a different region and or even a different account. So in that case, really that's like the next step up where you can create, if you lose a region, that's okay. I'm still going to have a backup in a different region. And you can
Mhm.
choose multiple regions. So depending on how far you want to take your paranoia, if you're saying, what's going to happen if there's multiple region outages? Well, there's
Mhm.
nothing to keep you from performing a backup in multiple regions. Gosh, and at that point, you have a backup on every continent.
Yeah.
And the cross-account disaster recovery, that's going to allow you to create a backup of the data in a completely separate AWS account altogether. So there's just no way that even if somebody would be able to breach an account, well, you can say that I'm going to make that backup available in that other account. And in there, you can choose again different regions where you want to store the data. Generally, that's within AWS and within the confines of AWS. That's considered, what do they call it, logical air gapping. And the reason why there's this word logical air gapping, because it's not really air gapping, because the data is still within AWS. Yeah, it's on a different account, different region, but really to get to the real true air gapping, you really need to put your eggs into a different basket altogether. And you do that over here under lifecycle management.
Mhm.
So when
Okay.
you turn this on, if you say that storage repository, remember when we just looked at the storage repositories, that's where we're going to make use of those. So my AWS instances, my AWS EBS, well, I can actually store that even in Azure. So when I select Azure here, yeah, we're going to make your backups available in a stored, immutable fashion in Azure. And that's really the absolute spicy paranoia that we were talking about just a moment ago, because that gives you cross-cloud immutable backups. That's real air gapping, because that
Got it.
is even in a different cloud provider. So if even Jeff Bezos wakes up tomorrow morning and says, hey, starting Monday morning, everything's going to be 10 times the price, that's kind of sort of like ransomware. Uh, you could say, yeah, not for me, because I'm just going to spin up my resources in Azure. So that's an option as well. So
Got it.
that's not logical air gapping. That is true air gapping. Just put your AWS backups into Azure. Another thing that's because we just talked about cross region. So just thought of that. So cross region backups, that's your DR. Why do people shy away from this? Well, because effectively it doubles your backup cost, right? Because you're creating two backups in two different regions. And there's an interesting way of taking care of that cost impact as well. And when you go into lifecycle management, you're going to find that entry right here. Choose different retention for DR snapshots. Because let's face it, if you are in a DR situation, that's not a regular recovery. That's not somebody saying, hey, I lost a file or a folder, or I need to bring back a volume. No, no, no. This is, oh, we lost an entire region. We lost an entire account. This is really bad stuff. And if your retention, let's just say, is 30 days, you're not going to go back in time 30 days. You're going to go back to probably the last backup. And this can be in even very short intervals. So with N2WS backup and recovery, we can have backup intervals of as low as 60 seconds. So you're probably going to go back to that last backup that you created. Why keep all of your backups in that DR region? Because that's going to dramatically increase your backup cost. So having the ability right here to split that, instead of doubling my backup cost, it's just going to increase my backup cost by a fraction, because I'm just keeping one backup, two, three. So that's totally up to me. The other thing, remember Mel, paranoid Mel? Now
Sure.
you can, on top of that, you can also add compliance lock for that as well. And you do that with this tick box here. So you can say, well, these backups, however many you want to create, 1, 2, 3, you can then say, well, for that amount of time, I'm going to put a compliance lock on that. And the way you do that is with two tick boxes. Tick here, how long, and do you want to protect that with a compliance lock? Why wouldn't you do that? So in this case, I can then say, yeah, I'm super safe, because now I have a disaster recovery backup in a different DR region. And on top of it, absolutely nobody. That's a compliance lock. Even the admin, even AWS itself cannot overwrite this. So this is what I meant earlier when I was joking. Well, even if the bad guys get in, They can't really do anything because it's in a vault, it's time locked. It's like I always joke, when you're in a bank and you see that sign which says, oh, well, even if you rob us, we can't get into the vault because it's time locked. That's exactly the same thing. So this is something you want to turn on. And why wouldn't you turn this on? So this is really going to help you dramatically. And if you really wanted to, if you want to take this one step further, yes, you have another tick box right here. You can, again, turn this on for the duration, heck, if you wanted to, of your backup. So I'm keeping 14 days worth of backup. So I could theoretically, if I wanted to, say, yeah, and I'm going to put a compliance lock on that as well. So absolutely nobody can touch those. But at the very bare minimum, I would say if you create disaster recovery backups, split them up, the retention time, that's going to save you a dramatic amount of money. And on top of that, why not make those disaster recovery backups then immutable as well?
I wanted to ask you something. You've been on countless customer calls in the past 7 years, right? And some, they had really difficult disasters, some ransomware, some not. What are the most common mistakes that you see that those companies are making? I'm kind of curious to what you see and what's kind of very common, so we can make sure that our people are not doing the
For,
same mistakes.
well, it's not really their fault either. And the reason for that is I've been on the other side of the fence. I've been a network admin before. And when you're a network admin, there's a whole bunch of things. Backups isn't the only thing you're doing. You have constantly calls, you have constantly cries for help. Help me with this, help me with that. So it's and making sure that your backups are viable, that they're secure. That's almost like a full-time job by now. Um, so you could hire somebody just to be your backup admin and take care of nothing but your backups. So that's a good question. So what are the things that customers should do? Well, first off, there is a certain amount of security that you can get. So if you're saying, oh, I'm going to perform a disaster recovery backup just in case, this can be region outages, which is, I don't want to say common, but it can happen. And then ransomware attacks, well, that's the boogeyman, of course, that's really bad. So you want to take care of this. But whatever you're doing, there's always a cost involved, because the more security you have, well, the more expensive it
Yeah,
gets, because every layer of security adds something to it. So when I create disaster recovery backups, well, that's going to add an additional layer of security, but there's a price. Vast majority where they had trouble in the end is they didn't perform disaster recovery backups. That's an easy one. That's really an easy one. Just create a disaster recovery backup in a different account, in a different
hmm
region. Because if
hmm
somebody actually breaches your account, it's not a big deal, because you have the ability to have your backups in a completely different account. And then on top of that, remember last time when we did the last TLDR, the recovery scenarios?
hmm
That's something else. Just set this up, do your disaster recovery backups, and then set a recovery scenario to quickly fail over. And this is really another one where you can say, okay, yes, it's going to add security, but it's going to add a cost. But if I separate the retention, heck, my retention could be 365 days, my retention could be 7 years. Why not keep the retention for my really last line of defense, my disaster recovery backups? I'm just going to make that a couple days. That's going to save me money. So yes, at first you think my boss is never going to sign off on this. So he's going to sign off on twice the backup cost. But this is he's going to sign off on, because you're just keeping one backup and you're going to make it immutable. So I would say that's really it. It's sorting through what makes financial sense, what gives me the maximum
yeah.
amount of security, and making sure with the recovery scenarios that they actually work.
Essentially, what you're saying is that you don't see any management non-signing off on the extra cost that you're adding for security, basically, and real security. And we're
Exactly.
not talking about something in access or nothing, something nice to have. So it's like a necessity for the
Yeah,
business.
absolutely. And no manager isn't going to sign off on this. If you're saying one additional backup, yeah, sure, absolutely. It essentially doubles our security. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Well, which brings us to one more thing, and that's interesting. It doesn't actually directly have anything to do with backups. So another thing that you can also implement really to ransomware proof your environment, something shouldn't even happen, is it's called secure DR. So we talked quite a bit about disaster recovery. So I'm going to put my
Mhm.
disaster recovery backups into a different account. I also want to make sure that that account is not just safe, but super safe. That account has an armor around it. So that armor that you're putting around it, that's called secure DR. And the way you turn on that feature is over here. So when you go to your accounts, you have a disaster recovery account defined. Click on that. And again, I guess the theme today is movies and tick boxes. It's a tick box. Use secure DR account. So when you turn this on, there's a blue box down here which says select prohibited permissions. So those are undesirable permissions you don't want anybody to have in your DR account. Generally, what I see is DR accounts, nobody has access to this. It's a vault. You're just pouring your backups into that account. Worst case scenario, you're going to spin up your production environment in that account, but nobody should have access to that account. So this is where you're going to make sure that that's the case. So for all of the different services that we back up, we also have the ability to monitor for certain permissions suddenly appearing. So for show and tell, I usually do delete snapshots. I don't want anybody deleting my cloud native backup snapshots in that environment. So when you turn this on, and yes, you can choose, well, how often are we checking for this? We are not just checking for the role or the user that we are using to store data in that account. No, 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 no. We're actually monitoring the entire account, all the roles, all the users. We continually check if anybody suddenly gets these permissions. And why do I keep using that word, suddenly gets these permissions? Because that's how usually ransomware attacks work. Some hacker gets access to something and then suddenly starts sneaking in permissions on seldomly used users, roles, that sort of thing, so that you're aware of the fact that suddenly something has changed in your environment. We're going to keep track of that. And when that happens, when these undesirable permissions suddenly pop up, we're going to alert you to that fact. Again, it's a few tick boxes. Why wouldn't you turn this on? It doesn't cost you anything. So yeah, that is definitely something I would suggest is something that you can turn on as well, that tremendously increases your ongoing security, to make sure that really you even notice when something changes oddly in your environment. And that brings us to the Q&A, right?
It does. I also wanted to ask you all of the kind of basic security stuff in the product, multi-factor authentication, all these kind of stuff. We support, we have, again, new guy questions.
No, that's a great question. I mean, yes, of course. Again, it's another paranoia question. So as I mentioned earlier, deadbolt, lock the door. So yes, why wouldn't you put
Okay.
more better locks on the door? So our entire solution is multi-tenancy capable, which means you can give users access to their data. You can put up virtual fences around the data so that nobody can see data they shouldn't be seeing. Okay, that's one thing. But then the next thing is, well, how do you allow them authentication to the console? So you either have an identity service provider, Active Directory, Federation Services, Okta, Ping, One Login, anything that speaks SAML is going to work just right out of the box. Then generally you also use strong authentication, multi-factor authentication,
Mm-hmm.
tokens, smart cards, fingerprints, or all the whole gamut.
Yep. Yep.
What if I don't have that? What if I don't have an identity service provider? Well, then our console also supports multi-factor authentication. So even if you don't have that really costly infrastructure that keeps all of that, that's okay, because our console also has multi-factor authentication. You can just simply turn it on within the console for each user if you want to.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, I'll do one more question because we're almost out of time. I have I wonder about cross-region DR for encrypted resources.
Excellent question. So whoever asked that, yes, I know exactly where this is coming from. So AWS has some restrictions on disaster recovery with encrypted resources. So encrypted resources, again, why wouldn't you turn this on? But AWS has some issues with that. So if you went, in quotes, the easy route and turned on, yeah, encryption is great, but you didn't change the default encryption key, there's an issue because it doesn't like performing disaster recovery backups into other regions, other accounts, if the encryption key is exactly the default encryption key. So what our solution can do, and that really saves you a tremendous amount of time, we have the ability to switch out encryption keys. So if, heck, and you can even do this if it's not DR related, if you're saying, hey, I have a project, my manager is requesting for me to change out the encryption keys on my resources every 6 months. Well, how am I going to do this? This is a project. I need to write a project plan and schedule weeks of time to do this, depending on how many resources I'm protecting. Well, you don't have to, because our solution has the ability to switch out encryption keys. So disaster recovery, cross account, cross region, cross cloud, no problem at all. Within the product, there's the option as well to change the encryption key, to switch it out.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Join us next, September 12th, cost savings and resource control. So yeah, we got a few customer stories there, which would save them a lot of money. Enjoy the rest of the summer and see you next month.
See you.